Welcome to another edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and if you're watching or listening to this podcast, I ask that you hit the like or the subscribe button. It has been a whirlwind since Donald Trump was inaugurated, from executive orders to cabinet nominations. We'll talk about that. Also, we'll talk about one executive order that my panel of Democrats and Republicans can agree on, and it might surprise you. And we'll delve into what the Democrats have to do from this point forward moving on. It's coming up in this edition of Trunk and Tales. And with me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett also served as the state attorney general for the state of Pennsylvania and also as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett teaches law at Duquesne University. Also joining us is Jim Byrne. Jim is the chairman emeritus of the Democratic Party in the state of Pennsylvania. Jim also served in county and in city governments, and he, while never abandoning politics, Jim practices law. And also with us is Keith Schmidt. Keith was the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum. Keith also consulted on Santorum's 2012 presidential campaign. Keith has his own consulting firm. Normally joining us is Joe Mystic, who is well known in Democratic circles around the state. Joe couldn't be with us today. Hopefully he'll be with us our next time. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us once again for Trunk and Tales. Lots been happening. As a matter of fact, perhaps one of you or all of you have more knowledge than I do, but I cannot recall an administration starting like this one has started in just a matter of less than 2 weeks. It has been a whirlwind. So, Keith, I will ask you first. Why is the president trying to do so much so quickly?
Well, he certainly is. It's as aggressive a start of an administration that probably I can remember in my lifetime. I remember a conversation last week about executive orders, and somebody was surprised that in my lifetime the person that did the most actually was Jimmy Carter, but not all in the beginning. His average each year was higher than anyone up to the point of his presidency, and probably any president since up to now. But he has an aggressive agenda. It's as we all know, an equally divided Congress, just about. A lot of these executive orders, if he wants them to last beyond his term, have to be memorialized in legislation, and that's a tall order. And that's something that I would say a lot of your listeners and a lot of average Americans who go about their day think that when somebody gives an executive order, it changes things permanently. It doesn't. It is raw meat to the people that supported you. I think the president, knowing that the path in Congress might take a little longer than he's comfortable with in some of the immediate things he's did, has decided to go this route to show people that I'm good to my word. He talked about a lot of landmark changes he wanted to do in Washington and around the world, and he's doing that largely by executive order. But again, the challenge now is can he memorialize these over the next 4 years into legislation that becomes the law of the land? And I would suggest also this, that even though he's the new president, he's the old president. This is his second term. And quite frankly, he doesn't have 4 years. He has 2 years. The second term midterms, after a second term midterm, it's not that you're marginalized, but it's going to be very difficult for this president to get a lot done unless he breaks the historic model and actually gains seats in the midterm, which I'm sure is his goal, but that's a tough nut to crack. So I think he has 2 years. I think that's why he's as aggressive as he is with these executive orders and trying to hit the ground running. And I'll end with this. I just had a conversation with a buddy of mine who's a very politically astute, and we always talk, and he'll call me when he's on the road. And he was on the road this morning. And the one thing that's interesting is it's the first time in a long time that every day I think average Americans are looking to Washington and to the White House to see what's happening. Like there's so much happening that it's the lead in every news. God forbid, the lead today changed because of the tragedy in Washington, and rightly so. But how immersed people are with the politics of Washington and what's going on during this transition, it's very interesting that not just politicos, everybody is watching. So the microscope is on this president, and we'll see how this all works out for him.
Jim?
Oh, it's been a pretty torrid pace, that's for sure. He's hit the ground running like he said he would. He's trying to maintain and honor campaign promises that he said that he would act on if he was elected. So we're seeing that. Eventually he'll run out of steam. There won't be anything else to write an executive order about, and then he's going to have to get to serious governing, and that will be interesting to watch because we've already had 4 years of proof that he can't do that. So I mean, yeah, we'll see when the theatrics of Oval Office executive order signing goes away and the honeymoon period wears off. Not that he's even getting one, and we'll see what it's all about. So to answer the question you raised, yeah, it's been a pretty torrid pace right out of the gate. I think it's deflection away from the fact that we have a divided Congress. It's going to be hard for him to move any of this into codification through legislative action. And it's also a diversion away from the issues with respect to the pardons. I know you guys talked about that, and either side could be vilified for decisions they make in that regard, but it still is a diversion he needs to get away from, or an issue he needs to divert away from. And the appointments, especially Bobby Kennedy right now, things of that nature. So I think a lot of it is honoring his requests, honoring his commitments to the voters that got him in, trying to do as much as he can because it's going to be difficult once we get past executive orders, and to try to deflect away from things that are happening with the appointments and other matters.
Stacey, I'm going to add in this. We've never lived through something like this. I don't know what happened in the Taft administration when he came back the second time around, but in this case, you have a gentleman who is not patient to begin with. I think in his first tour of duty in the White House, he had a much more sophisticated selection of cabinet members, business people, who might have had a little more influence than he has in this selection of cabinet members, who are more people who were followers in those 4 years that he was out of office, talking about him. And I don't feel that he really has any personal restraints on just trying anything he wants to try and see what he can do. And he's looking at it, I agree with Keith, he's got 2 years, he doesn't have 4 years. He's looking at how much can I get done in those 2 or 4 years. And as I read the papers and so forth, he hasn't eliminated the idea that he can't run for a third term if he can get the Constitution changed. I think it's impossible for him to get the Constitution changed in the fact that it would require, I think it's 3/4 of the states to agree to change it. And he doesn't have 3/4 of the states. He has 22, 23 quarters states in that area. So I think he's trying to get as much done as he possibly can. And his use of outside people like Elon Musk, some of the things that are going on look like it's Elon Musk, authoring it, like the idea of a buyout. You see that a lot in business. You're buying somebody out of their contract. So there's different people influencing him. And then, as you know, he watches the media every day, and he likes being, I think, #1 story in the media.
He's, it's interesting you bring up, Gov, the third term thing. To me, I think that's folly. I do agree with you. I don't think it'll ever get passed. And quite frankly, I'd still, if the election was tomorrow, I'd still vote for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump's old. I mean, he's turning 79 this year, and I know what the presidency has done to every president that I saw, including Trump in his first 4 years. It aged him, and he's not going to somehow miraculously escape, the aging process. And I don't think he's going to want to be tagged like his predecessor with cognitive problems or not having the energy. And I have a feeling in the next 4 years, it could be a factor. It could be a factor in the next 4 years because of the rigors of the job. So I think that's talked about. I know a lot of coffee shops and bars, they're chatting about the third term. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do want to just dig down on one and get some some thoughts from my colleagues here. There's a flurry of executive orders, but the one that hit me and that I was actually happy, very happy to see, was designating the Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations, because the ability to go after them and the resources that you can use now changed dramatically. And I'm not sure why it took this long, and I'm not sure why we didn't do this a generation ago. You know, we're fighting a war with the cartels. The cartels were the ones controlling access to the border for people from all around the world. They're the ones cutting the deals with the South American drug lords and with China. And we've known since 2017 the Mexican government almost admits that more provinces are in control of the cartels than they control. So us taking on the cartels, I've been asking this question for 15 years. Like, we know where the poppy fields are. We know that the fentanyl's killing 60, 70,000 young people every year in America. It's a war, and we're losing it. And don't tell me that if we know where a terrorist or where somebody is a half world away, you know, just south of our border, we don't know where the drug lords' mansions are up on the hilltop. We don't know where they're growing the poppy. We don't know where their arsenals are. Of course we do. The time has come to take on this enemy in our southern border, not the Mexicans, not the Mexican government, not the establishment, but the cartels that have run ruin on that nation now for half a generation.
I would agree. I think that the tradition of the Department of Justice has been, well, this is organized crime. And they looked at it as organized crime, and they never looked at it as terror. Frankly, in the last 15, 20 years, I was looking at it as terror, because they were coming in, they're terroristic in regard to Mexico and countries in South America. That's how they've taken over in those areas. They're importing or exporting their product into our country, have assisted in creating a great desire for people to use drugs. We're spending a lot of money on that. So I have no problem with designating them as a terrorist organization as it affects the peace and tranquility of the United States and safety.
It falls within the definition. The consequences of what they do, I think, fits the definition because of the catastrophic loss it has created in the United States of America, economically, in the cost of human life, whether it be through addiction, overdose, death, or murder. So I do believe that you can meet the definition. We have, with other organizations on the other side of the world that have met that definition, have been dealt with harshly and continue to be dealt with harshly and decisively, as they should be. Entities and the resurgence somewhat of ISIS in Syria needs to be watched. We'll deal with that. The Sunni Triangle and the growth of ISIS and elements of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, we dealt with that. Deal with it. Afghanistan, we've had to deal with it there. Anywhere these type of terrorist organizations stick up surface, we have had to act, and we have continued to act, and will continue to act. The flip side of that, and this is the consideration that Americans need to now make, this is necessary. I think it's something that should have been done, like he said, a long time ago, because I do think these cartels fit that definition. We do not see Americans vacationing in Syria. We do not see them vacationing in Iraq. We do not see them vacationing on the other side of the world where these elements exist, because we know the consequences of what could happen to American lives if they are there. Having this executive order in place now and follow up to it or growth upon it to take action with respect to it will lead Americans to seriously have to consider whether they go down to Cancun, whether they visit Mexico City, whether they go over to the Baja Peninsula, because these organizations are so intertwined with government. You wonder whether, the governments in some instances, if they push back, they get killed. So you have to be prepared, if you're going to be a tourist because of this, to look for retaliation if you go into Mexico at any point now moving.
Well, let's talk about the retaliation. If you're going to designate something as a terrorist organization, excuse me, that would imply that, as we have done, as you pointed out, Jim, in the Middle East especially, that we've taken military action. Are all three of you saying that it's okay for the United States to take military action inside of Mexico?
Let me just ask you this. What does that designation do? What does it do? If you're just going to stick your tongue out and call them a name, then we're done right now. I suspect that it means there's going to be some type of action subsequent to that designation. I think it's logical to assume that that might be what the president is considering. What else would he be considering? So I'm coming from an assumption that decisive action would be taken in that fashion, and that would be the retaliatory response I would expect from those organizations.
I agree with Jim. I think that's what I meant to point out when I spoke a few minutes ago, is I think this designation puts them on their heels and puts them on notice that up to and including military action is now on the table to eradicate this threat. And it is a threat. I mean, and terrorists are a threat to the safety of America and Americans, and indirectly, because of the drugs that are coming across the border, because of the fentanyl, because of the criminals that are allowing to cross over the border. Remember, nothing happens, nothing goes south to north into America without them getting a piece. I mean, they are controlling the border. The time has come to put them on their heels and literally have some kind of strategy in place to eradicate the Mexican drug cartels. I mean, they're not a threat in Syria. They're not a threat half the world away. They are a threat on our southern border. They are in this hemisphere, and they are killing Americans. The time has come to respond, and up to and including force.
And I wouldn't be surprised that if it hasn't already started, it's starting soon. Discussions are going on with the Mexican government to say, you got to start controlling what's going on down there, or we're just going to come in.
They can't.
Take the drugs out of it. Let's say that we knew there was an organization down there that was working on battlefield nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Would we let that go on? No, we wouldn't let that go on. So this is, to me, a social nuclear weapon that's been going on in addicting our young people and causing death to many young people. And it goes all the way back to, as we know, fentanyl coming from China. It is literally somewhat of an attack by China on the United States that we have not responded to. And there's a lot of reasons we have not responded directly to China. But this is the best way to respond to it.
That's
right.
the question. Is China next?
Yeah.
That's a whole different ball of wax.
Sure is. Absolutely. I want to get back to the political side of some of this. I think all three of you kind of mentioned that this is probably 2 years for the president to be able to get through what he might want to get through. The question is, can he do that? Jim, you pointed out that it's a divided Congress, really. Even though the Republicans have control of the House and the Senate, it's a paper-thin margin in the House, and sometimes you have to wonder just how much control the Speaker has over his own House.
I don't think the Speaker has much control right now. I was amazed to see that they got that he got back in without as much drama as last year. I think it's tenuous at best. I think the ice is very thin, so it's tough for him to herd those cats. The D's will not work with him unless we see something really, really good for the country that they can come across and work. The way Republicans came across and worked with Democrats on that immigration bill that Trump killed when Biden was in office. So there is a path. To your point, though, I think Donald Trump is about Donald Trump. I think we can all agree about that. And if he wants some type of legacy or wants to show some victories, he doesn't have a choice in the next year, 2 years, but to strike some deals. He likes to make deals. And he will have to make deals with Democrats in order to have some type of progress or objective victory to show the electorate when he comes up for his midterms, or it could be a blue wave. But there can't be a blue wave without blue water, and the Democrats, which is another conversation, need to get their heads up out of the sand and start seriously talking about messaging sooner rather than later. The DNC is meeting this weekend to elect a new chair, and let's get some serious conversations about what went wrong. Study the film. And if you're going to come out with empty pockets in 2 years, you're not going to, with an opportunity to get the House and maybe even the Senate back. If you're not going to come out with a message, we're not Donald Trump. Well, how has that worked for our party the last 2 cycles?
Let me add this. It's going to be very interesting to see how the Democrats react to the terrorist designation. Are they going to be opposed to it? I think if they oppose it as an organization or even individually, they're in for a difficult time for the next 2 years. I think this was a lead on his part to kind of put them on their heels. He's given them a lot of opportunity to shoot at them on other issues, but this one was probably his best one to go with.
The one thing that's helping the president right now is what I talked about when I first gave comments when this program began, which was Americans are right now engaged, and to me it's almost historic. I mean, we joke about the fact in the last 20 years nobody knows what's happening in City Hall, nobody knows what's happening in the state. We do, because that's what we do. Nobody could talk about any bill that's passed or didn't pass in Congress. They're going about their lives. They could care less. Now it's literally, unless some horrific thing happens, it leads the news every day. And I know it's early. It's only a couple weeks in. But it's how long he can keep America's attention on his agenda. Because he will, I'm sure, employ a card similar to Ronald Reagan. And he will go to the American people in this equally divided Congress if they start to butt him up, come up with a brick wall and things are not getting passed because they're deliberating and they're not getting the necessary votes, and put pressure on people directly, both his own party, because he'll project. It's not a problem for him to project blame on someone else, or the Democrats. So as long as he keeps their attention and he shares his priorities with them and asks people to go to Congress, it could be the first time in 2 generations where Americans will engage in the process and say, we voted for change, we need these changes to happen, and put real pressure on senators in tough states and congressmen that win on the margins each time. It could be a very, very much an engaged electorate. If it isn't, it could be a long 2 years. And quite frankly, there's the other wild card, and this is hope beyond hope. But if he gets aggressive and still loses, or it could be he could use it to his advantage in the midterms too, saying that this is an unworkable situation. You know, I need these people to help me. I have to have a better cushion in the House, a better cushion in the Senate. We all agree on this agenda, and they're stopping it on Capitol Hill. That might be pie in the sky. But I predict now, and let's visit this in 6 or 8 months, I think the president is going to have to continue to have a conversation with the American people. And I think that's going to be part of the strategy.
Well, on the political side, he's already, as far as his cabinet nominees, tried to rein in support by threatening to primary some senators, if I'm not mistaken. So
is that right?
Oh, yes, he has. They've made no bones about it. Jim, I want to get back to something, and maybe we'd get Keith and the governor to talk about the opposing party, and that is your party. As you said, they're going to be meeting. Is the Democratic Party right now nationally boxed into a corner? It would seem that way to a lot of people. That's what you hear, that they're having a hard time fighting back. What does the party have to do? Analyze exactly what went wrong and then what the message should be?
That's it, Stacy. It's that simple. I don't think they're boxed into anything.
Okay.
I think they need to be aggressive. I think they need to be proactive. I think they need to continue to be the loyal voice of opposition to the party that's in power. That's how the framers wrote this up. They cannot be remiss in their obligation to be that voice. And I think they will continue to do so. So they're not boxed in a corner. They have to point out when they think this man has made a mistake or he's going off the rails, which he will give plenty of ammunition to the Democratic Party. They need to go out and be sure their comms teams are all ready to go and push right back on everything Donald Trump does. But it's not something, and I think Senator Fetterman pointed this out, and he's right. You don't just say, I'm against it because he's for it on every single thing, vis-a-vis this declaration about the cartels. Don't do that. But when he steps over a line, and he will do that quite a bit, hit him hard on the comms team. Use the micro-targeting you have in place to reach out to those voters and talk about a message. But you can't ignore the fact that he just won every swing state, that he came in decisively. And you have to have an honest look in the mirror as to what could have happened, what should have been done. Did you fall back and make the same mistakes that Senator Clinton made in 2016? In many instances, we did. And there were folks, just like 2016, yelling at them about messaging and what they needed to do and what they weren't paying attention to. Oh, that's okay. Well, no, it isn't okay. So be honest. And I've said this before on your show, and I said it 8 years ago when Hillary lost. Have an honest conversation about what the message needs to be. Get back the people that were with us that Donald Trump got because he took our message. Get it back and show through action and history that that is our message because we act on it. We don't just give voice service and lip service to it. And this is the most important part. Don't let the cadavers come to the autopsy table and help do the autopsy. They need to get on with their life's work. That's what the Democrats need. They better have that conversation. If this is a big celebration down there this weekend, and they're in denial, and I don't think they will be, we still have a lot of work we need to do.
Stacy, let me add this. Both parties have a similar issue, is that they have factions on the extremes. And the parties have been trying to work with them. You looked at one of the reasons President Biden lost is, he went too far left. And I don't think the Democratic Party as a whole is that far left. I think the majority of the country is kind of in the middle, maybe 2%, 3% back and forth. And Jim and I have talked about this many times. I think that's part of the problem here in Pennsylvania, finding good candidates that aren't at the extremes. In order to win, you've got to come to the middle. And I've always encouraged, I'm going to encourage it again here today, we need to open the primaries up to let independents come in and vote in the elections at this point in time, because that brings it back to the middle. But that meeting that's coming up down there, there's a Republican state committee coming up in a week. You can't let the extremes run the party.
Yeah, and it's an aging party on both sides. I mean, we elected a 78-year-old president again. We might have a little advantage over the Democrats because we have a younger vice president that we could talk about a future move. But both parties have to look at the bench and say, it's aging. It's aging for the Republicans in Congress. It's aging for the Democrats. It's aging across the board. The people that have been in control have all been north of 70 for too long. I think if a younger person comes forward in either party, I think if they are articulate and come up with some new ideas, I think it could be a meaningful change for either party. I think that we have to pass the torch. We saw the transition from the oldest president of the United States to the second oldest president, but now he'll be the oldest at the end of his term. I mean, that generation has served us well, but it's time to move on. And I'm not sure that person has yet. That person on the Democratic side, and I'm sure Jim would agree, I'm not sure that leader they have found that yet, and it's a process. But I don't think it's going to be I don't think it's going to be from the old scorecard. I actually think in the next few years there's going to be somebody on a new scorecard. That's my opinion.
Like Barack Obama in 2008, when he lit it up yeah, exactly. There's a vacuum right now, and vacuums will get filled. And I think that it's the pendulum, the cycle of this business. But you're right, to the point that you need a bench, there will be consequences if you don't have a bench. Right now we're seeing Donald Trump because the Democrats didn't have a bench. I would submit that if we would have done a primary, and that was a mistake, if we had done a primary, we may have these people right here, right now, and maybe even in the White House for all we know. So yes, I mean, and even you don't have to look any further than Allegheny County to see what happens when you don't build a bench. Back in the early to mid 90s, a bunch of young people were coming up in the Democratic Party. The Steve Zapalas, the Jay Costas, the Dan Honoratos, the John Weinsteins, to some extent myself, and the Forsters of the world gave us no room, and there was no bench. And then Cyril came out against Mr. Roddy, and then Larry Dunn in '95. So you had from '95 up until 2004, I think, you've had Republicans running the county because the Democrats didn't see down the field. It happens at all levels.
Well, let me ask this question, and we only have just about 2 minutes or so. Is what happened with the state row offices in Pennsylvania a reflection of what happened in this election? Because, Governor, I think you pointed out before that you can't remember a time when there were Republicans holding all three of those offices, Attorney General, State Auditor, and Treasurer.
That's right, but I can also add that the Attorney General's office has only been an elected office since 1968, and I can guarantee you since '68, there was never a time that all three were Republican controlled at that time. And I think it's interesting. I think it also has to do with the candidates that the Democrats put up in November. They weren't necessarily the best candidates. And Mr. DePasquale, I know him well, but he wasn't qualified to be the Attorney General, and he ran against somebody who was a 8-year district attorney. And I think the people looked at the qualifications. The other two, the Auditor General and the Treasurer, both were incumbents and they were running. And Mr. DeFore, who's the Auditor General, is actually the first person who is an auditor by trade who has served as the Auditor General. I don't know if the people knew that at the time. But so we had good qualified candidates. Democrats have good qualified candidates out there. They just didn't put them up.
And there are certain elections that have coattails and that we talk about. Some elections that don't have coattails. This was clearly a coattail election because of the fact that the top of the ticket spent billions of dollars. So it was hard to get an independent message for any of those Democrats or Republicans below them because whatever they spent was de minimis. There were billions being spent at the top. So I think what you saw was them voting for the top of the ticket and then getting support for the non-ticket people because of that big win at the top. But because I know state senators, congressmen, other people that spent record amount of money and nothing changed in their elections, largely because it didn't matter that they were breaking records. You couldn't punch through billions of dollars.
The field operation here, the state party had a good coordinated campaign. Unlike 2012, guys, the national team did not work with the state party this time. They didn't.
Wow.
They did not do it. We had a nice thing going back in 2012. When I spoke in the caucus rooms up there at the state party meeting, I explained that to them. As I saw it, I said, look, since Chairman Street's been in, you have had very good success since he came in. What's changed this time, other than we had a national coordinated campaign that did not interface with us like Obama did in 2012? That's part of it. And so despite all that good ground game that the state party had, they didn't connect because the Nationals refused to connect with them. The Nationals need to wear what happened in Pennsylvania, not the local.
We are over our time, but I do have to ask you this question, Jim. So the reports that we heard that Jim Brady, who is
Bob Brady,
is the powerhouse of Democrats in Philadelphia and the eastern part of the state. We heard reports that the Harris campaign didn't come in and work with him at all. In fact, really kind of pushed him to the side. Is that right? Did that happen?
Oh, they did. That's absolutely true. And then look at the snarky remark that the Harris folks made when Congressman Brady called them out for failing to work with people on the ground who know their neighborhoods. Well, Jim Byrne lives in Millville. If the Nationals come in and go to the local party, we're going to work with that Jim Byrne guy. He's been really nice. Maybe Jim Byrne sued everybody in the Allegheny Valley. But don't tell us our business. That's the value of retail politics, of those of us on the ground in these communities. They didn't listen to us. Obama listened to us in 12, we won. The Clintons did the same thing in 16, they lost. And you can go across the board, both sides of the aisle. Call it out when you see it. Listen to the folks on the ground. And if you don't, you proceed at your own risk. And it's a fool's errand to go into somebody's backyard and tell them what they're doing wrong when they've done it, when they forgot more than you know. So the snarky remark by the Harris people to Congressman Brady, who knows where every manhole cover is in the eastern half of the state, speaks volumes to who was right and wrong on that conversation. I told him that in the Philly caucus 2 weeks ago. I said, you were absolutely right, and so was everybody else. They did not listen to us. I'm not doing finger pointing here, but when somebody says something that isn't true, it isn't true. If you worked with us, maybe PA would have been blue. It wouldn't have mattered. But I've seen what happened before. So have all of us on both sides when somebody comes in and tries to tell us our business, Republican and Democrat alike.
All right, guys, we have to wrap it up here. Thank you for those comments, all of you. We will continue our look at politics after the analysis of what happened in the early part of the Trump administration. Also, maybe we'll delve in a little bit of what Keith just talked about, and that's the amount of money being spent on state legislative races and just local races altogether. I think that could be a good topic down the road here. Again, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, I urge you to hit the like or the subscribe button. For right now, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again for the next edition of Trunk and Tales.
Thanks, Stacy.
We'll see you, Stacy.